Now we're going to turn to our panel discussion, and I'm going to introduce our three amazing panelists. Zoe Gross is Director of Advocacy at the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, Autism Self-Advocacy Network, sorry. Previously, she worked as a special assistant at the Administration for Community Living and as a policy analyst on Senator Tom Harkin's Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee staff. Welcome, Zoe, who I have long admired and never gotten to meet. Patricia M. Jones is a person with a developmental disability and a member of the independent living movement since the early 1990s. I've learned so much from Patricia. She graduated from Arizona State University in 2013 with a BS degree in Parks and Recreation Management, Therapeutic Recreation, and a minor in Nonprofit Administration. And driving over here, we decided that the next theme for the next storytelling event we do is going to be about work and employment. Becca Monteleone is one of my favorite humans and a touchstone for me. She is Assistant Professor of Disability and Technology at the University of Toledo. All right, so Patricia, I'm hoping to start with you. You live independently, but I don't think that happened overnight. Can you tell us a little bit about about your current situation and how you ended up in it?
Okay. So no, I actually have never been. I grew up. I grew up in a family that supported my independence. Let's put it that way. I went to regular school growing up. I went to, I lived in the community growing up. I did not, but I did have some fears even growing up. I grew up in the 70s, and so it was the early days of the disability movement. I now know, I did not know that at the time, but it was the early days of the disability movement. So I grew up, I did have a situation where I had a friend of mine in school that was the only other person I knew of with a disability that got taken out of our classroom and put into special school. And so I grew up sort of being afraid that somebody was going to come along and do that to me. But my parents and my family reassured me that my family would not take me out and put me in an institution. But I did have some other things as I grew up, where that included some misdiagnoses and that sort of thing. But so I did kind of grow up. When I grew up, I did have my own. I did get into my own apartment after. Basically, first time I was in my own apartment was when I went to college for the first time. And
well, tell us about the apartment and how it made you feel to have your own place.
So my first apartment that wasn't in the dorms was when I went to Slippery Rock University, and I got an apartment on the second floor of a house with a roommate that I had found through the school. I went through some struggles there. I did not realize at first about I went through some struggles as far as not having a lot of food in the house and so forth at the time. I kind of relied on what I got from my financial aid to keep me going, and if ran out of money, I kind of ran out of money. But
It's not, I'm going to interrupt for just a sec. So it's not
uh-huh.
simply about having a roof over your head, living
Right.
independently. It's about a lot of other things too.
It's about the
Yeah.
responsibilities, yeah.
Yeah.
And I had to learn some of that because I was, I grew up in a house where I was the last of 5 kids, 5 people, and so I was sheltered a lot when I was younger, and so I had to learn how to stand on my own 2 feet, if you will.
What kind of support outside of your family? What kind of support have you gotten? What's the most important thing that you've gotten? The most important help that you've gotten over the years that helped you live independently?
Oh, wow. Well, I would say I've had support from a lot of different levels. I've had some support from some people who opened doors for me, I would say, uh, who were in positions of being able to open doors for me, that believed in me and believed in what I had to offer. And so I got a lot of opportunities based on the fact that, based on people's beliefs in me. One of them was when I worked at the Center for Disability Law, when Perry Jude Radisick was the executive director. She was a staunch supporter of mine, I would say, and really helped me to have some confidence in myself, I would say.
That's amazing. Okay, I want to make sure we get
Yeah.
to our other panelists. We'll definitely come back to you. So it
Okay.
sounds like it's a matter of finding support on a lot of levels: family,
Yes.
friends, and also individuals that you encounter. So not
Right.
always government help.
No.
So
I
Zoe,
I was
oh,
not
sorry, go on.
I was not ever I do not receive DDD services. We didn't really have that mechanism that way back in Pennsylvania. I never grew up with those kind of services, so I found my supports in the people around me.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. For anyone who doesn't know, DDD stands for the Division of Developmental Disabilities. That's how it's referred to in the state of Arizona. Arizona has plenty of problems, but there are no waiting lists for services. So there are states, and Zoe, you can probably speak to this better than I can, Becca, you as well, where there are unbelievably long waiting lists for services. So it's not a guarantee. Nothing is a guarantee. So I hear a lot about people having to kind of cobble things together and make their own way. Zoe, I wanted to ask you if you can talk about this from a public policy perspective, in terms of sort of what challenges your organization has seen when it comes to providing housing in the community. What could be different?
Sure. So there's many challenges. A big one is the lack of affordable and accessible housing. There's currently no housing market in the US where someone can afford a safe, decent apartment on SSI income without rental assistance. And there's also no place in the US where there is enough affordable housing for the amount of people who are on rental assistance and need affordable housing. Programs that provide affordable housing are underfunded, especially disability-specific programs. And these programs tend to be small and have a hard time connecting to the people who need them. And then, of course, very few homes are accessible. Under 1% are wheelchair accessible. And then there's other kinds of disabilities that need home modifications as well. So very few homes overall. There's historically been a lot of resistance to autistic people living in the community. A lot of housing models that people are still pursuing today focus on group homes, or it can wind up replicating aspects of institutional living. And these models can isolate people from the rest of the community, as well as being really expensive, too expensive for most people. Finally, there's challenges with ensuring access to supports. Obviously, supports are different from housing, but supports can have an effect on what housing is available to us. Obviously, getting home and community-based services makes it easier to live in the community, but we still have challenges finding enough HCBS providers and funding for those services. Like Amy said, there are wait lists in many states. And additionally, there's a shortage of direct service providers. So the lack of accessible and affordable housing, just bringing all these things together, the lack of accessible and affordable housing means people may have to move significant distances to find a good home, and that can disconnect them from services, especially if they move states, as well as moving them far from family and friends who they may get support from as well.
What about oversight? This isn't on our list of questions, but I'm going to toss it in there. Government oversight in terms of safety for people who are in community housing. It would probably apply more to group homes than people living completely independently.
Well, there's long-term care ombudsman whose job it is to oversee those things and provide safety oversight. But in terms of group homes, that's a concern that we often have because if people aren't getting visitors in, or if people are kind of isolated in their placement, it can be hard for them to report abuse or for people to find out if things are going on that shouldn't be.
So what sort of solutions do you think should be put into place? I think it's a good thing to talk about on the anniversary of the ADA. Have we come as far as we should have come?
There's still a huge amount left to do. It's important to note there are some approaches to providing housing that we want to steer clear of. Often people talk about housing in a way that connects housing and services or encourage people to get services that are tied to their housing. We want to stay away from that because it's important for people to be able to live where they want and still get the services they need. And if services are tied to housing, then people can't move without losing services or can't change service providers without moving. So it can trap people in either a housing situation or with a service provider that they don't want to be with. At the same time, access to supports is a really important part of people maintaining independence and being able to live where they want to live. This means that full funding for home and community-based services and better pay for the direct support workforce is a huge part of ensuring that people with disabilities can live in the community. We also want to look at accessibility of communities more broadly, how people access services and transportation, how easy it is to move within the community, even things like landlord-tenant laws or other laws that may determine whether people are at risk of evictions. All these things can have an impact on whether people can get and keep housing in the community. Finally, like I talked about, there is little affordable housing at the moment, and rental assistance isn't keeping up with demand. So funding affordable housing programs is really important, especially programs that help people with disabilities who are leaving institutions or at risk of entering institutions.
So who's falling short here? Who's responsible for these gaps, and how do we convince them to fix them?
So this is about how we as a country decide to allocate funding for social services. There, you may have read about effort that was made to really increase funding for home and community-based services for the direct support workforce that didn't end up happening. But these are things that need to be fixed through Congress. So these are issues that you can talk to your members of Congress about if these are things that you're passionate about, and just let them know that you care about these issues, you want to see more funding for these services, that this is where more of our budget as a country should be going.
Yeah, thank you. Becca, you work with a lot of self-advocates. What sort of patterns do you see, and what do people tell you that they want?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. And thank you to the other panelists as well as the storytellers. I think there are just kind of two things, I don't know if that I call them patterns, but two things that I want to underline. And Patricia and Zoe have actually both kind of touched on these things already. And the first, I think, from the very beginning of the deinstitutionalization movement in the 60s and 70s, the kind of metric that's been used to measure success is the type of housing that people live in, right? So there is now this kind of embedded assumption that if we move people from this category to this category, then every person has a better experience now. And because of that, we're not often thinking about what's happening internally in this category of now kind of community living, right? And there's a lot of variation that's happening in that category, which I think Zoe was alluding to. And so I think we need to move away from this quantitative metric of, this percentage of people live in this kind of housing, and therefore we have been successful in the independent living movement, and instead really focus on the quality of life in those different kinds of housing in the community. And one thing that I pull from the National Core Indicators, it's a survey that's done every year with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and the most recent data that they have, 11% of the people that they surveyed reported that they, quote, often feel lonely. And so this idea that just being physically in a community gives you community is one that isn't necessarily correct, right? And so I think moving away from saying that this kind of housing is how we solve the problem, these percentage of people who live there, now check mark, we're done, I think is something that we have to move toward, right? So thinking about the ways that people are still extremely isolated in what is ostensibly a community-based living arrangement. I think that you point to that so beautifully in your story for Center for Public Integrity, Amy, that we reproduce institutional thinking in community spaces, right? Because community-based living, home, is not just a type of place. I think that's almost exactly what Leah said in her story, right? There are other components, these kind of qualitative components that we have to be thinking about as we're, judging whether people are living the kinds of lives that they want to live in the kinds of places that they want to live. And then the other thing I want to point to is something that Patricia pointed out, which is just that there is a whole group of people, the vast majority of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities either aren't eligible for services at all, or are only eligible for kind of a very minimum amount of services in wherever they're living. And so this group of people faces a kind of particular set of challenges when thinking about kind of safe and appropriate housing, right? So whether that's persistent discrimination from landlords, which we know is happening, or exploitation because, not having access to knowledge about your housing rights, unsafe or precarious housing because of affordability reasons, which is also linked to the unemployment and underemployment of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so, we have a whole set of challenges, both from people who have complex needs and a lot of access to services, and people who don't have access to services at all. So I'll stop there. I have some other thoughts, but I think there's another question coming.
Yes, there is. What do you think family members and others who have adults with IDD in their lives can do to support them?
So I'm a really strong believer in mutual aid and interdependence. And I think we cannot rely on policy systems to save us. And so I think that we are all accountable for building the kinds of communities that we want to see. There are tons of training programs and skill building programs and self-advocacy programs for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I think often the assumption in those programs is that if you learn all these skills, then you will be successful out in the community. And I think that's a little dishonest because there are other people who are culpable in that system. And so I think that, we all need to work toward building the kinds of futures that we want. And that involves doing more than just supporting someone to build independent living skills. It means that, if you don't have a disability, you are also responsible for creating a community in which people with disabilities are welcome.
Thank you, Becca. We're gonna do Q&A in just a second. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box or whatever we call it. I'm wondering, Patricia, what you think people need in order to achieve what Becca was talking about, in order to get that kind of independence.
Well, I think there's a lot of things, and I believe in, of course, in person-centered, and so it can vary from person to person regarding what they need. But I think that overall, what we need is some more more outside the box thinking, within the system, within systems of support, within I know you and I, Amy, were talking on the way over here today about vocational rehabilitation and how they plan for people who need a lot of support or no support, but they don't think about what the nuances are of the needs in between there. That there are people with disabilities that are professionals and need a different kind of support in a professional sense, but maybe through somebody who understands how to make a way for people with disabilities in a professional position. And
people who want to be professionals, yeah,
right. And so for me, that's one of the things that's coming up for me in my life right now. I think we need to continue to think outside the box about supports and services, needing more more ways of being able to be supportive in the community. We haven't changed how our system works since I've been here, really, and that's been, I came here in 1996.
And here is Arizona, right?
Here's Arizona.
Arizona. Yeah. So I kind of liked the out of the box idea that you and I came up with driving over here.
Yeah.
When Patricia was telling me what she just told you all, and I said, I don't know, Patricia, I think you should tell your voc rehab counselor that you want to be a voc rehab counselor.
I
think you'd make a phenomenal one. They should hire you tomorrow.
And what I would like to do is really make the behind the scenes changes there, but to lay out a way of a system of support that has different layers of support, I would say. Not just all of one kind of support or no support, which is kind of, I think, the way it works right now.
It's so, yeah, sorry.
Identify what the needs are, and
I think you got at it, definitely. And Zoe and Becca, feel free to chime in as well. Yeah, no. All right, so I think we're ready to move on to our Q&A. We do have an audience member I would love to hear from. We are very lucky to be joined by Arizona State Representative Jennifer Longden.
Oh yeah,
who I met. I know Patricia knows her too. I cannot work much with Representative Longden because we became close after I profiled her, which sometimes happens in journalism. You have to go from source to friend. But I thought it would be interesting to have Representative Longden talk a little bit about supported decision-making, which I think is also part of this broader web of things that need to happen for people to be able to live independently. Not that you have to take part in supported decision-making, but it can be really helpful. I thought maybe she could talk about that because she worked for many years to get that passed here in Arizona. Now, Charlie, I don't know how we make that magic happen, but
I just opened it so she can talk.
There we go.
awesome.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, Amy. Hello, Tricia. And I've really enjoyed the panel discussion, and I really enjoyed the storytellers. I think these opportunities to foster the authentic voices and experiences of disability are huge. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a full-time wheelchair user. I sustained a spinal cord injury almost 20 years ago. So, you know, this is every bit as much a part of my life. And, you know, I have struggled with home. I have struggled, like Tricia, with finding employment. And I think making sure that we have strong educational opportunities and workforce development all along the spectrum of need is huge. But you asked me to speak about supported decision-making. So I'm really proud of this effort, 5 years in the making, and we just got it done. For those of you that don't know what supported decision-making is, just as disability takes place on the spectrum, so does our need for assistance and support. And even people who are typically able consistently use supported decision-making. When you talk to your best friend about, should I take that job or should I go out with this person? When you consult with your parents or a financial advisor or some other trusted person about making a home purchase or where you're going to go to college, or should I take that job, or which of these 3 outfits should I wear for this big thing? All of that is supported decision-making. But when it happens among our friends who are typically able, it's not questioned. But people with disabilities need some additional layers of protection in order to make supported decision-making work. So supported decision-making simply allows people with disabilities an opportunity to surround themselves with a team of their choosing to help them as they make decisions about healthcare, financial matters, housing, and on and on. It saves us from more restrictive and intrusive guardianships where it is the right solution. So it's one more tool in the toolbox to help us manage our lives as we move forward. And I'm proud of the work, and it's not work that one does alone. So I'm proud of all of the advocates who've been a huge part of getting this done, a 5-year journey.
Thank you, Jen. I'm so sorry, but I'm gonna interrupt you because we only have a couple minutes left.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure we have time for a couple questions. And also, I think, Becca, you had something you wanted to clarify?
Oh, yeah. So I just got a quick question about what mutual aid means. So for what I mean by this is sort of informal networks in which communities agree to be mutually responsible for each other. And so it's not relying on formal systems, which often with eligibility requirements, with wait lists, with all of these kinds of things we've been talking about, exclude a lot of people or make it difficult or impossible to get the actual resources and support that you need. And so mutual aid and this other term I use, interdependence, which comes from disability justice, is predicated on this idea that everyone has something to contribute and also everyone has something to receive. And so I think that kind of model, it helps in these places, in these moments where we can't afford to wait for the policy to change.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for that explanation. All right, Charlie, do we have time for a couple questions?
Yes, I'm going to start with a question from Jordan Young, who says, "Hi all, thank you so much for this evening. My twin sister over a year ago took a huge leap towards independence and moved into her own apartment. She has autism, and I am trying to support her in the best way that I can. Patricia's story is similar to hers, and it spoke to my heart. We are also the youngest of 5. Anywho, my question is, how can I best support her independence without acting intrusive?"
Ooh, Patricia, I think that's one for you. Are you on mute? I think you're on mute.
I had to turn something off here that
That's okay.
So the question is, how do you support somebody without being too supportive? Is that the gist?
Yes, such a good question.
Okay, so what you do is you ask you ask the person before you go step in and support them. Do you need some help? Do you want some support in this and support in that? What I was going to put down is one of the things that happened with me when I first moved out in Arizona. I did a personal futures plan and I was able to invite to the table the people that I wanted to be around me to support me, and not invite the people I didn't want to support me, which was very important because there were some people that were trying to support me that kept putting me into ruts that I didn't want to be in. So
right. So it's
yeah.
important to find the right people to say yes to some, to say no to others.
Right.
And I think the big takeaway is that you should ask before you do, which I think that's a phenomenal answer. Charlie, do we have time for one more before we wrap it up?
Yes, this question just came in from Paul, who says, Patricia, what were the disability laws back in the early days?
So when I first went to college, for one thing, it was before the ADA. So that's one of my experiences that affected my life, in that I didn't have the right to accommodations when I first went to college because the ADA didn't exist yet. The Rehabilitation Act happened when I was a child, I now know. And the beginnings of the self-advocacy movement had occurred at that point. Believe IDEA, right? I believe IDEA was kind of around about the same time too.
The IDEA, yeah, the special education law, yeah.
But the big one was that the ADA did not exist at that time, and so people could discriminate against you because of your disability still. And that did occur in my community. There would be restaurants that would not allow people in because they had a certain disability in my community, community, in areas of Pittsburgh where I grew up.
Let's keep going just to see if we can get maybe one more in. I hear a rumor that Paul raised his hand. Paul, did you raise your hand? Did you have something you wanted to say? Paul Costantini, our storyteller.
That was Paul's question, the last one we just asked. Yeah. So we got
I didn't hear Paul. It was a really good question, Paul. So sorry. All right. Are we going to wrap up now, Jen?
Yeah.
Or do we have time for one more?
I don't think we do have one more question. Yeah, let's do quickie.
Okay. This is from Andrea and Simon. They say, I loved hearing about what home looks like from these storytellers. I would love to hear from the panelists or the storytellers if they are taking questions about what a welcoming community looks like, whether it is in a workplace, a housing community, or a community of interdependence/mutual support. When you enter a space that purports to be a community, what shows you that they are genuine?
Zoe, I don't see your, I think I screwed up my screen. Do you want to take that one?
That's a really big question. I think that with disability, there's times when people are kind of going off of like preset, like these are the accommodations that people can get. And So you can have one of these 5 things. And then there's times when people are saying, okay, let's work together to figure out what are the accommodations that you need to access the same things that other people are accessing. And those are 2 very different approaches. And one is much more welcoming than the other. And in fact, to take the second approach, that's what's in the spirit of the law of the ADA. The ADA requires an individualized process, not just a form where you say, check one of these boxes and you can have one of these 4 accommodations, but a back and forth between people where it's worked out what's going to meet the person's needs. So I think that makes a big difference.
I gotta say, as a journalist and as a person who is close to somebody with IDD, I don't see the true implementation very often, but maybe that'll be the next 33 years.
Can I add a little note?
I think we're ready to. Oh yeah, of course.
Just a little quick. I was just really inspired by what Zoe just said, because I also think often there is a ton of labor that is put on disabled people and really any marginalized people when they're entering a community, even a community that's like, everybody's welcome, but we haven't done any of the work to make sure that you're actually welcome here. And so often all of this kind of labor gets put on people to explain exactly how they would be welcome in that space. And so I think also there's a certain amount of work that needs to be done by community organizers, anticipating that they will have a diverse group of people in any community, or that they should have a diverse group of people in any community. So rather than kind of forcing people to both explain exactly what sort of accommodations they need and exactly how to achieve them, which is often kind of the next step that people have to do, and to recommend an interpreter service, and to recommend a dietarily friendly food option, all of this work that often gets displaced onto people. Having some of that work done or anticipated in advance, I think is one step toward kind of more inclusive spaces.
Thank you. Yeah, such thoughtful answers and information this evening. I'm so grateful for this conversation. Jennifer, is it time to wrap up? I hate to, but I think
I know, unfortunately, yes. But I just wanted to thank everyone. Amy, thank you for all your work on this. Thanks to all the panelists and the storytellers. And we will be doing a video of this and share that, and a follow-up story later. So if you signed up, that information will be available to you, and you can always get more information at publicintegrity.org or wordslaw.org. So thank you all so much.
And please support the Center for Public Integrity. They do amazing work, and journalism is, how do I put it, tanking around our ankles? not at CPI, but it's changing a lot. And this is part of the new model, and it's pretty phenomenal. So thank you to our panelists, thanks to the storytellers, to Maddie, to the interpreters, to CPI. Take care, everybody.